right, welcome to today's lecture on peer review. This lecture is going to be split into two sections: peer review in our class and how it should function in your activity for this week, and then peer review in the scientific discourse community and the role it plays in validating academic research. Both are absolutely related, and in fact, your peer review will require you to walk the walk of a reviewer who is reading a submitted article for a journal. I'll separate the two processes at first and end today's lecture talking about how peer review in college settings should be an opportunity for you to practice the peer review of your scientific discourse communities. So in general, evaluating your peers' work is going to involve three processes: description, evaluation, and suggestion. First, you're going to need to describe what is happening in the document. Just as in solving a problem, we first need to define the problem, or in producing scientific knowledge, we first need to describe what already exists. You first need to have an understanding of what your peer is actually trying to say, do, or argue. This process is without judgment, but it can actually reveal to your peer that there may be gaps or misperceptions in how readers are receiving information from their text. If you conclude that the goal of the text is to inform, whereas your author really wanted to persuade you of something, that's telling and how the author might need to revise. In addition to describing the work, this is also a good time to begin with what the author has done well. What is in accordance with the field's conventions? What is especially interesting and intriguing, or written well? At this point, you can move to an evaluation or a criticism of the work. What needs to be changed? What isn't in accordance with the field's conventions? Every evaluation or criticism should be partnered with a suggestion. If you've decided something needs to be changed, you should offer up a suggestion for how it can be changed. So this is what we mean by constructive criticism. The goal in describing, evaluating, and suggesting is to help create a better piece of scholarship, not to tear down your peer on the basis of their draft. Feedback should be more helpful than it is critical, but that doesn't mean that you should only say nice things about your peers' work. You can still suggest specific and tangible ways for improvement. So I want to now quickly run through some questions that you might ask of a draft during a peer review. In terms of content, you might need to describe the details of the research within the parameter of the field's conventions or the assignment. Is the content relevant to the field? Does it matter to the field? Does it correspond to questions that are already a part of the field's interests? In other words, does it respond appropriately to its situation and context? Has the author left anything out that is necessary for understanding other ideas presented? Have they gone beyond the scope of the assignment or of the subject? And can you verify the information they've presented using the sources they've cited or another source entirely? For organization, you might try to articulate what you feel is the relationship between the individual parts of the text and the overall goal. Is there a direct or an indirect approach to structure? In other words, is organization visible or invisible? Is it distracting? Is it confusing? What is its central organizing principle, and how does that fit with the conventions of the field? How does the text transition through different stages of the information or argument that it presents? Style and readability for our purposes are really centered around issues of appropriateness. Is the tone, structure, grammar, word choice, and jargon readable in the context of the disciplinary community? In other words, you might find it difficult to read, but is that the convention? Are things spelled correctly with correct punctuation? Are sentence lengths varied, and is that important? Are there any places where the author has worded something in a vague, cliched, or biased way? If you or another person read the document aloud, do you catch any mistakes in readability? And finally, issues of design are going to be relatively easy to evaluate for us because academic genres have very specific formatting guidelines according to the journals you submit to. So the biggest question you'll ask yourself is, does it conform to the journal or the field? You might also look at whether on first glance paragraphs look readable. Are they obnoxiously long? Are they ridiculously short? Does there need to be something to break up the paragraphs, like headings? So that's what you're going to be thinking about with peer review in the classroom. With academic peer review, which is the process by which your scientific peers will validate the knowledge you produce, let's see if there's much of a difference. What you're seeing here are the actual peer review guidelines for the publisher John Wiley & Sons, which is an academic publishing house. Reviewers, experts in their fields, are asked to consider these questions when looking over a researcher's manuscript. What is the main question being addressed, and is it relevant and interesting? Is the topic original? What does it add to the subject area compared with already existing knowledge? Is it well written? Is it clear and easy to read? Are the conclusions consistent with the data presented? Do they address the main question? This is an important one, I think. If the author is challenging some significant consensus in the field, do they make a substantial and credible case? That is the basis of a paradigm shift. If there are tables or figures, what do they add? Do they aid or do they hinder understanding? And finally, are the methods appropriate to the questions being asked? As you can see here, these questions show up in most college-level explanations of in-class peer review. You're looking for whether the idea is unique, whether its claim is backed up with sufficient evidence, and if the work is appropriate to the given rhetorical situation. So, I want to end with something that I think is worth mentioning, despite the rosy view of peer review I've given here, which is something that you're familiar with. Peer evaluations, whether for class or for research, should be valid and reliable. We can safely assume that our reviewers want us to succeed. But that isn't always the case. Reviews can be given based on a reviewer's bias towards you or your topic. The reviewer may not be reliable. You're going to be reviewed by 2 reviewers most of the time, and there's a joke in academic circles around reviewer 2, who in no uncertain terms is a total asshole. Sometimes you can pick apart the value in these more asinine reviews, but sometimes they really are as simple and as mean as, I question the author's intelligence. In any situation where you're receiving feedback, be sure you approach with a discerning eye and understand that not all reviews will be helpful and that you shouldn't take it personally. As an example of one of these reviewer 2 type reviews is the following, which is probably one of the worst I've seen and which received a lot of press in 2015. Postdoc Fiona Ingleby submitted a manuscript to PLOS 1 in which she received a review from a reviewer who made blatantly sexist comments about her manuscript, commenting that she would benefit from male biologists previewing her work. While suggesting that there be another set of eyes on a manuscript is generally good advice, tying it to gender in this case almost invalidates the suggestion. Fortunately, this kind of blatantly biased review is relatively uncommon and often taken care of quickly. PLOS 1 quickly removed the reviewer from their database after this went public. But this is to say that a significant part of becoming a researcher is actually feeling invalidated. It's rejection. For good reasons sometimes, but also for bad reasons. The best we can do is recognize what's helpful and what isn't, and this is very clearly not helpful, and improve in ways that are within our abilities to as scientists. So that's the end of today's lecture, and it's actually the last lecture for this unit on literature review. You'll conduct a peer review of your peers' annotated bibliographies this week, write up your final literature review, and then I'll see you again for the research funding proposal, or RFP. Your next lecture is going to break down the genre of the RFP and describe ways that your literature review is going to serve as the beginning foundations of an argument for researching a topic further and getting money for it. So I'll see you then.